is that this decision comes out of direct legal advocacy by attorneys, by others who are working with them in courts across the country, right? So in courts here in Brooklyn, in courts in Massachusetts, in Virginia, in the Western District in Washington, who are all fighting. Many of those attorneys, I will mention also, are Muslims and come from these countries, right? So many people from all over the community really working together. What started last week with the executive order, when we saw that executive order working from the mayor's office and with our partners across the city, we realized what was happening immediately. We were actually at the airport. I was at the airport last week working with families who had relatives in detention, working with attorneys who were there and others, speaking with the federal officials. And over that past week, over the 7 days or so that we've seen pass, I can't believe it's only been 7 days, we managed, and there's, to give a little bit of a silver lining to what we saw over the last 7 days, we did manage to prevent the removal of hundreds or thousands of people across the country, which is an amazing thing. We haven't been, it's really great. We have not so far succeeded in preventing everything that the president has tried to do through the executive order, and people are going to continue working on it, right? This temporary restraining order is what it sounds like. It's temporary, and it's going to require a lot more work. So we're going to continue working with them as well. The other thing that I wanted to just make sure to emphasize is that when we talk about sort of like immigration issues, what we often think about is sort of like the borders, the airports, right? Like who's allowed to come in, who can be deported, what are the rules about visas, passports, all those things. Those are the federal issues, right? Those are things that are in the federal government's purview. That's their job to deal with, like who comes in, who gets deported. But one of the, and not to say that we have no input into that, because we've obviously been working very hard to make sure that our voice is heard in that debate and to make sure that our interests are heard as New York. But when somebody is in the United States, an immigrant, regardless of how they came in, whether they came in over the border, whether they came in through inspection at the airport, whether they had a visa or not, when that person is in New York City, that person is New York City's responsibility. So the New York City government, where I work, and many of our partners, that's our responsibility, same as anybody else who lives in the city, right? Our job is to work with the residents of New York City. It's not our business what their immigration status is, what their visa is, what their passport says, where they're from, what their religion is. So our goal is really to make sure that we're serving everybody. And especially when we see these kind of threats coming from the outside, whether it's from the federal government, whether it's from people who are committing hate crimes, all of these different threats, our job is to make sure that people are protected. And our job is to make sure that people have information about the services that are available, of which there are many, and I think the council member mentioned a number of them, like IDNYC. My colleague before mentioned that we have a legal services program that can help people. Those are the things that we want to make sure people know about. And so I just wanted to make sure to emphasize that. I have some materials here as well that I'll make available at the end.
Thank you. Thank you. Naz, would you like to
You can go on.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much. So I know we, I did say that, some of the executive orders that came out were disheartening, but on the flip side, what was really heartening was the mobilization of so many different communities across the nation, and that all supported each other. So Naz, I don't know if you'd like to speak to that, some of sort of the on-the-ground mobilizing that's occurring, and to help both the detainees, but also let's talk about all the other sort of work that we're doing.
Right, so it was amazing to see last week people mobilizing at airports across the country to help people who are being detained at the airport or even just questioned at the airport, but held for several hours, who weren't from these 7 countries, to get out safely. Because the situation has changed almost daily, if not hourly. So, in the beginning, green card holders were being told that they couldn't enter, and then that was stopped. And then, after Sunday, pretty much all the airlines would not let anybody who had a valid visa board a plane to the United States. So if you had a green card, then you were in luck. But even though some of the different orders that had come out of this court in the Eastern District of New York, in Brooklyn, in Boston, in Virginia, were saying that people should be allowed to board the plane even if they have even though they have only an immigrant or a non-immigrant visa, the airlines, because of pressure from the government, were not letting people board. So, you know, people have been, I think what's been incredible is organizations, groups coming together like No Ban USA, organizing translators, attorneys to be at the airports, so that when people arrive, there's somebody there who can assist them if something comes up. I think also people who, so an organization like the International Refugee Assistance Project that has existed for so many years and really, you know, galvanized lawyers across the country who may not have any experience with immigration law, but who are, you know, committed to these principles. And also just organizers who've been on the ground dealing with issues that affect targeted communities for so many years, who are already, you know, the reason that the bodega strike was so effective and we were able, like, the people here were able to get them out is because Debbie has been in this community for a very long time. The organizers in this community have been here for a long time. They know these people. They know how to mobilize them. I will add that I think with respect to the order that was issued yesterday out of Washington State, I think one key component as to why people are hopeful right now is because the judge did order that it would apply nationwide, but CBP and the State Department have made it very clear publicly that they're going to allow people to board the planes. So even if his order had been whatever it was, and CBP was still issuing no board recommendations to the airlines for anybody who has like a student visa or they have a spouse visa, but they've never entered the country, they were going to be allowed to board the plane. That is a major, major shift from last week. And I think, you know, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. It seems like fairly disorganized over there. But I will say this, that, you know, CBP and Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, the people who are in charge of enforcement within the United States, so they're the people who pick up somebody who's out of status and put them in deportation, they've always operated kind of as rogue agencies. So, you know, when the order came out, it emboldened people in those agencies who already, you know, thought that things were too lax on Muslims. And so we're hopeful now that CBP has announced it's going to allow people to board, and because the State Department has announced that everybody who had a valid visa from those countries as of the signing of the executive order will be allowed to board. Those are reinstated. I mean, there are a lot of like legal issues to get in there, but I will say this is, if you know anybody who's affected, tell them to book a ticket as soon as possible. We don't know when or how this will be appealed, and you know, if the appeals court that oversees that court will overturn it. And so, you know, best, safest thing to do, if possible, is to tell people to come home as soon as you can. And if you are from one of those countries, and if you're not a United States citizen, do not leave.
Sam, would you like to add on? I think, you know, what's been interesting is Naz talked about some of the sort of nonprofit and organizing community, and I'd love to hear a little bit more from the government, both city and state level, that's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from the city's perspective, we obviously share many of the concerns that folks have here, but the other thing that the city does is that the city runs a number of very important services. So for instance, we run a number of major hospitals. We have the largest hospital system in the country. We run a school system that serves over 1 million students and interacts with well more than 1 million, maybe 2 million parents as well. We run a gigantic police department. We run a local jail. All of these things are things that we need to make sure are appropriately serving everybody who lives in New York City. And the other thing we have to make sure that we do in our role working with community members is make sure that people understand that those things are safe to interact with. Because the last thing that we need to see, and we've seen this before, this is not a new thing, when people get afraid, and many times understandably afraid, like now, sometimes people stop interacting with certain city agencies, certain federal agencies, certain state agencies. Sometimes people are afraid of interacting with any government agency. And we've seen that when, even last year, I think maybe some of you remember the federal government had initiated some home raids against women and children who had crossed the U.S. border from Central America. This was past December, January. And we saw immediately, that day, we saw a reduction in the number of children from Central America who showed up at school. And that's really unacceptable, right? And we need to make clear, and that's our job, is to make clear to people that when you go to school, we are not reporting anybody. When you get your IDNYC card, we don't even ask for your immigration status. We don't want it. When you go to the hospital, what we care about is actually providing health care, right? We're not asking people how much money do you have, what's your visa status, what your religion is. Those aren't the things that we need to know. We need to make sure that we're providing services for people. So I think a lot of our organizing work has been to make clear that we're getting the right information out into the community. And we've done that through a couple of different ways. So one of the things is that we need to work across the whole city government. The city government is hundreds of thousands of employees. And so one of the things that my office, the Office of Immigrant Affairs, has been doing is we've been meeting with all the different commissioners, all the different staff members from those different agencies. So people like Consumer Affairs, where Tangela works, people like the NYPD, to make sure they understand what's going on and what kind of fears people might be seeing, what kind of effects this order might be having, working with people from all over the place to make sure that the city agencies know how to help. We've also worked with a number of leaders of religious organizations of all different faiths to provide information to them that they can provide then to their congregants. We've worked with people all over the city, and will continue to do so. And very interested in hearing other opportunities that people have for us to support that kind of mobilization.
That's great. And I will add anecdotally to the point, I really appreciate the outreach, because I know I heard post the election, one of the Muslim parents on the Upper East Side got so nervous about what happened. She didn't want to go to her daughter's high school parent-teacher conference because she didn't want to change. She didn't know how the teacher would perceive her wearing hijab. And I've spoken to a lot of other community members that about the fact that the schools really are there to provide a service and do outreach. And one, on the flip side, is encouraging the schools to do the outreach and let parents know that this is a safe place. So that's great. So I know post Donald Trump did sign some executive orders in which he did mention that cities that chose to be sanctuary cities would lose federal funding. So can we speak a little bit about that? I know the council member hinted at that too, and I don't know who would like to speak to that first.
Start.
Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to start.
Yeah.
So the executive order that the president issued, this was 2 days prior to the one that was issued that deals with the entry bans and the refugee bans. So this was a week ago last Wednesday. It said that he directs his staff to find a way to strip federal funding, didn't say which federal funding, strip federal funding from cities that they consider to be cities or states that they consider to be what they call sanctuary jurisdictions. And this is a term that's been going around for a long time. The idea of sort of sanctuary has existed for many, many years, decades, centuries, right? Originating really in the religious movement through the 80s when there were a number of wars, civil wars in Central America, and we saw people coming, and now. So the concept is a little bit amorphous, right? Sanctuaries have sometimes referred to a church that actually provides a physical place for somebody to live. Recently, sometimes they've referred to school campuses that make a policy of not informing federal immigration officers if they hear about somebody. It's also been applied to some cities that may have, for instance, confidentiality policies, right? We don't tell the government if somebody comes to our hospital and they may lack a visa, for instance. And then it's also been applied in a couple of other instances. The council member spoke about a policy that the city here has that we will not comply with federal requests for people who are in our custody. So for instance, at Rikers or at the NYPD custody, unless that person is a public safety threat, unless that person has a conviction that is a very dangerous conviction, right? Those are some of the policies that New York City, the voters of New York City, the representatives of New York City have all agreed on. Those are things that we believe are in the best interest of New York City. What the order says is that a sanctuary jurisdiction, as they call it, is one that does not comply with one specific provision of federal law. And what that federal law says is it says a city can't prohibit its employees. So a city can't tell its employees, you can't call federal immigration authorities and tell them about somebody's immigration status. That's a federal law, and that's been on the books for a number of years now. So that we're going to get into this very soon, I think, with the federal government coming and saying, we think, the federal government's going to come and say, we think certain jurisdictions, certain cities, certain states that have certain policies that we don't like, that they don't like, fall into that category, sanctuary jurisdictions. And that's going to be a fight, right? And that's a fight that we are prepared to have about what is actually compliance with this law. Are we complying or not complying with these laws? And are we doing the right thing for New York City that we need to continue to do? This is something that the mayor has been very, very committed to making sure that we defend the policies that New York City has put into place. And there will, I assure you, much as we've seen over the past week at the airports and in the courts, there will be legal challenges as well. So it's not something that we are prepared to sort of abandon our policies, which is really what the federal government is trying to do, to trying to coerce cities and states into abandoning pro-immigrant policies.
I'll just add on that front that something that makes it difficult, I think, to explain to like most of the American public is the complexity of immigration law, and it's even confusing for immigration attorneys. But it's important to keep in mind that immigration law is federal, so that means that the federal government makes the rules and enforces those rules. And so to the extent that they can withdraw funding from so-called sanctuary jurisdictions, I mean, one, I think that it's a little more difficult than what happened this past week with CBP and ICE with respect to the fact that CBP and ICE, like I said, are rogue agencies. There are people in those agencies that have want to implement those policies. I'm not so sure about the people who handle giving out money, but it's certainly possible. And I think also with respect to with respect to the idea of a sanctuary city or a sanctuary campus, we have to be realistic about, if ICE issues a warrant to somebody, you have to comply with that warrant, right? ICE is Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. So there are certain things that are limitations upon the city, upon schools, campuses. You can resist ICE coming onto your campus, possibly by setting up some kind of security system where they have to identify themselves. But at the end of the day, if they have a warrant, they can pick somebody up. I also wanted to say that part of the larger backdrop to all of this, the sanctuary order, the Muslim ban, is that, again, immigration law is federally enforced. And the courts have historically recognized that this is within the plenary power of the executive branch, the branch that the president oversees. So they have a lot of leeway. Even with the courts have very limited power with respect to immigration, that they have absolute jurisdiction over. And that's fairly limited to deportation proceedings and naturalization. So while it is hopeful that these judges have taken a stand, I would like to add that we can't necessarily see them as our potential saviors unless they go back on decades of jurisprudence about what they can interfere with respect to immigration.
I just like to add, I think the only hope we have is that the constitutional issues that the judges will apply. And I think that's the decision with this judge. I think it just shows that our Constitution is our strength, right, in this country. That's why we are where we are. And I do have faith in the judges making the right decisions as far as the Constitution is involved. The other thing I'd like to mention, I know that Naz mentioned something about people were not allowed to board. And as a matter of fact, the airlines, they will be fined. And also they will have to pay for the ticket for those people to go back to wherever they came from. So obviously the airlines are under tremendous stress. So there is a way how how the pressure is being put on the airlines, what they will have to, they will be fined, and we were hopeful yesterday than what happened that allowed the airlines to, to bring those people to this country. Now, as far as, why the government didn't do anything, saying we're not going to follow your order anymore. I think they thought really hard, and they thought this is going to be a major crisis. Therefore, it's better to just let it go and let's fight it in court. And I think that's really what they choose. And I think they choose the right path, because this could have been a major disaster between the judiciary and the executive. Just think about this. So I think some good lawyers there, they told them, look, don't do this. Let's fight this in court, and then we can, if we win in court. Let's not win in a way that we are not going to enforce your order, the judge's order, because separation of power, right? And that's very important here in this country. So.
That's great. Thanks. Naz, can I just go touch upon something? You made a point that ICE can only arrest you if they have a warrant. And I bring it up because actually I think the community, there is a lot of fear in the community. And I actually got a WhatsApp message from a cousin of mine who's an Uber driver, and I'm assuming it's coming from all the other drivers, that said that ICE is doing raids and you have to carry your passport and your certificate of nationality with you. Otherwise they'll just pick you up and deport you without any questions. So, the community doesn't really understand the procedure and understand. So could you just sort of clarify that a little bit? And,
So, if ICE comes across you and you have somehow, or they have reason to believe that you are not a United States citizen, so say they ask you for ID and you give them a green card, the burden then shifts to you to prove that you are in the country legally. So if ICE comes upon you and you have your ID NYC, which I have, all of you should get one, give them that. The moment that you admit, if they ask you where you were born, if they ask you, where your family's from, things like that, don't answer those. People shouldn't answer those questions if they're not United States citizens. If ICE approaches you on the street as you're driving, if you're an Uber driver or whatever, you can say, like, I don't want to answer any of these questions without my attorney present. Because they can pick you up and they can try to put you in removal if they have reason to believe that you are out of status, meaning that your work authorization is expired, or your green card has expired, or your visa has expired, etc. But the thing that's uncertain right now is to what extent ICE is going to start blanketly just picking up anybody who is out of status. So Obama announced this priority enforcement program a few years ago, by which there was a category of priorities, people who they were going to prioritize for removal or deportation. Not that everybody who didn't fit into those categories wouldn't be deported, but that the understanding was that CBP and ICE weren't really going to go after those people. So Trump has announced that he wants to kind of do away with that. I believe, I don't know all the details, but they have reissued that prioritization. So that right now it doesn't seem very different. I don't know if Sam can correct me on this. It's not very different from what was in place under Obama, but it is certainly possible that if they pick you up, if they see you and they find out that you don't have if they find out that you're not a United States citizen and they find out you don't have current legal status in the country, they can try to put you in removal proceedings. Whether or not you end up being detained, or whether or not you need to get bond to get out of detention, that's up for question. I will say this: even under Obama's priority enforcement program, so the people who are being prioritized were people who had committed crimes. It was basically that, people who presented so-called national security risks to the country, people who committed crimes. So even under that, we saw at Clear people who were Muslim who had just overstayed their visas. People who had overstayed a student visa or a visitor's visa, and were not priorities, no contact with the criminal justice system, they were not, in those priorities. They were low enforcement priorities. ICE was still, trying to go to their homes, ask them questions, and then issuing orders of removal, putting them into deportation proceedings. So, for example, we had a client who's Indian. He was here on a student visa. He had to drop out of school. He was no longer in status. ICE came to his home, took him to 26 Federal Plaza, where they're located downtown, questioned him about various things, his activities here in the United States. They asked him which Islamic lecturers he watches online, who are his favorite lecturers, and then they put him into deportation proceedings. And he's, I'm not saying that, certain people don't deserve to be deported. What I am saying is that he wasn't a priority under Obama's program, and they were still going after him. So, we have every reason to believe that this kind of effort, tactic will be doubled, multiplied exponentially under the Trump administration.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I just want to mention on this, which I don't think everyone knows maybe, is that one thing that's different about immigration court, and when you go to immigration court or if you're in removal proceedings, even if they're just accusing you of something like we've seen in these cases, immigration court is different than what we think of as court, like from Law and Order or something. When you get arrested by the police and you have to go to court, criminal court, they say you have the right to an attorney. They don't say that if you get arrested by immigration authorities, and that's because you don't have the right to an attorney. That's federal law, that there is no right to an attorney in immigration proceedings. That is something that has existed throughout the country's history, that there is no right because they consider deportation to be a civil penalty.
Sorry,
not a criminal penalty.
I just want to clarify. A right to a free attorney.
That's
so
right.
You can have an attorney representing you.
At no cost to the government.
Yeah.
That's right. So what I think one thing that I want to make sure is clear is that everybody can get legal help, right? And it's important to do so because immigration, I think as Naz was saying, is really complicated. I think when we work on these issues, we pull out our giant books of all the immigration laws, right? And that's just the laws. And then there's all these court decisions you have to look at too. It's almost impossible, if not impossible, to deal with without an attorney, I think. Especially for people who are in sort of criminal-related issues, for children who also do not have a right to an attorney at the government's expense. For people who are mentally ill, do not have a right to an attorney at the government's expense.
I'll point out that in New York City, all unaccompanied minors
That's right.
have now been provided an attorney in immigration.
That's right. Thanks to City Council funding, in fact, unaccompanied minors and people who come with, that's right, in California there are some decisions. And even here, there are arguments people have made that sometimes lead to the government appointing an attorney in isolated situations. The other thing that we have in New York City, is a program that provides representation to everybody who's detained and put into removal proceedings, which is a small proportion of the total number of people. A lot of people are put in these deportation proceedings, but not currently being detained, right? They live at home and they're maybe working while that's happening. So I think one thing that I wanted to make clear is that it's important to get this kind of really detailed immigration legal advice, especially for people who are from one of these countries, for instance, especially for people who may have had some kind of contact with the criminal justice system, for people who think that they may actually have sort of a case to make that they could apply for a green card, for instance, so that they could get a visa. So one way to do that is to speak with an attorney like Omar, to speak with a nonprofit organization like the one that Naz works at. And then the city has also created a program that provides free legal advice. It's called Action NYC. You can call 311 and they can make you an appointment. So these are all over the city. There's a lot of help out there. And I think the thing that we want to make clear is that people need to come out and take advantage of it to make sure that they get that help.
I just like to mention, I am part of the Association of Muslim American Lawyers. We have about 150 lawyers, members of our organization. And as we speak, actually, I'm speaking here to someone else is giving a lecture, someone else is giving training somewhere else. So we have a group of lawyers that are working on pro bono, round the clock, trying to call people who are immigration attorneys. And by the way, even our association called the Muslim American, Association of Muslim American Lawyers, you cannot believe the support we received. Lawyers from all over the country, not necessarily Muslims, they say, we're here to help you, we want to do this pro bono for you. It's amazing. It's like this country has, it's being united as we speak, for good cause. So it's great. So, our phone number is 212-609-7776. So anyone wants to call, we will direct you to any attorney. 212-609-7776.
I know I see some hands for questions. I promise you'll have time to ask your questions. We're doing really well on times, which I'm really excited by. My next question, I think we've touched upon, was just sort of look at like what do you see the sentiment in the community has been around things. And I know it's shifted every day as things have happened. I don't know if you would like to add on anything. Are you hearing anything at the city, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are afraid. And we've heard from people who have asked us, there's a lot of rumors going around, right? And we've gotten a lot of questions. Some people have asked us, are other countries going to be added to the list? And the truthful answer is we don't know. We don't know, right? And we have not seen any executive orders. There's been no leaks that said that's happening. I know there have been a lot of rumors going around. I've seen other rumors that said ICE is showing up at the schools, which has not been true. We've seen other rumors about different practices that maybe the NYPD is doing, which have not been true. We have seen a lot of rumors going around, and I think it's a scary thing, right? And you don't know what's right. We've seen a lot of leaks coming out of the White House, some of which have actually turned out to be true, and some of which haven't. So it's really hard to sort of separate truth from truth from fiction, to figure out, or what do they call it? Alternative fact? Is that the? I think that's been one of the real challenges for people in the community, is to like really suss out what is going on, which is an understandable thing. And I think one of the ways that I think we can sort of combat the sort of like rumors and the confusion, is through these kinds of events, which I know that our office is trying to do more of. And I'm very interested in hearing other places that we should be doing this kind of information sharing. But then also making sure that people sort of know where to turn to get good information. Organizations like the one that Omar works with, organizations like CUNY, those are all good places to get information, but people have to like really reach out, which can be an intimidating thing to do. So I think that's one of the things that I've really heard from the community, is like this sort of fear and confusion about the rumors that are going around.
Omar, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, it's sad because there are a lot of people I guess my voice is not that loud. It's sad there are a lot of people out there who are not necessarily from those countries, even though it doesn't make it right with those countries, right? We know that. So, but am I safe? And someone many people from Pakistan say, okay, I want to go back. I have a green card. Can I come back? It's very difficult for us to say, yes, you can do it, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen in a week. So my suggestion always to them, if it's not an emergency, please stay where you are for the time being. Don't go anywhere. Stay where you are, and then we see how this is going to go. So even if you're not from that specific country, for those specific countries, I would say if you are, some are from Pakistan, some are from other places, Afghanistan, I would just say, stay here and to see what will happen, because we don't know. We cannot even give an advice saying if he can go or not, because by the time that person come back, maybe the law changes. I mean, there will be another executive order. You don't know. So I think at least we are happy the fact that there is this decision. Also, there are people who are U.S. citizens. They're very scared. Is my citizenship going to get to be taken away from me? And even if I had two, and I'm not talking, but I'm talking people who have really a good understanding of the system. We're talking someone who is like oncologist, right? Who I know very well. He went to London. He is a British national, but also he's Pakistani. He asked me, can you get your phone number, because coming back, I'm not sure what will happen. And he's a U.S. citizen also. So this is there is a fear out there. People are really scared, and not because they're afraid not to come back, or because they have family members here. They build their own. They have like their own entourage. It's like dividing the families, and they're trying to separate everyone. That's what they're, some of them say, you know what, if I don't have to come back, they don't come back. So, but the problem is not me. We have major problem because I'm associated with many family members with this and this and that. So people going for business trips, and they're my friends and people I know, business trip, they worry to go for a business trip, to come back to and I'm not talking going to any of those countries. We're talking going to Europe, come back. And also, there is this rumor that we heard that actually they are asking people when they come in, they're asking them to give them a password to get into their phones and also their computers, which is very interesting.
Social media. They actually look at your
Yeah,
social media.
social
That's
media.
What I've heard a
So,
lot.
so you know what? You don't have to give your password, but please, if they take it from you, don't try to fight it and everything. Let them take it, but you don't have to give your password, right? I mean, I am an attorney. I travel, right? And I have cases. Can you imagine coming back and then they have someone, okay, I need your password to get my client's information? Think about this. It's not. It's not. So it's not, they can ask you, you don't have to, I mean, they can take your stuff. They can take your stuff. They have right to take your stuff, but you know what? They can take it, but you don't have to give them the password for them to get it.
Yeah, you want to add?
Yeah, so one thing that I think has really, one of our friends pointed out since last Wednesday when leaked versions of this order came out is that all of this uncertainty, like the leaking of the orders and then the uncertainty about how it's being applied, is essentially a form of psychological warfare, right?
Yeah.
It leaves you in a state of constant uncertainty about your safety, uncertainty about the safety of your community, of your loved ones. And so the same is true of what other people have said on this panel, that people from a range of privileges and backgrounds and statuses are all feeling really uncertain about what they can and cannot do and what's going to happen in the future. Just with respect to the last point, quick and dirty on seizing your electronics at the border. So CBP has a policy. They can take your electronics at the border. They don't need a warrant. They don't even need reasonable suspicion. Attorneys across the country have tried to litigate this. There's some movement forward with respect to needing reasonable suspicion to conduct what's called a forensic search of your phone. You do not need to give the password, but you should, like he said, you should know that they can keep your electronic devices, and they can keep them for quite a bit of time. You should not give them the password to your phone. The reason for that is that if for some reason, whatever, later on, they want to use whatever's in that phone against you or in that laptop against you, you can say that you did not give permission. This gets into complicated Fourth Amendment issues and permission to search and everything. And we're actually litigating this case a specific case about this right now, where our client's phone was taken and our communications with him were on the phone. We're hopeful that the tide will turn, that this will actually push the courts in some circumstances to really acknowledge, as the Supreme Court did 2 years ago with respect to cell phones, that if you're stopped on the street, they need a warrant to go into your phone. The border is considered kind of somewhat not a constitution-free zone, but the government has really, really broad powers at the border. So as of right now, they don't even need what's called reasonable suspicion to take your phone. They don't need to prove that. We're hopeful that courts will move in that direction, considering all of the significant privacy stakes that are interest in carrying whatever's in your electronic devices.
Can you speak a little bit more about what everyone else in the community of New York City and New York State can do to help those that are affected? What are the other things that we can do? Does anyone want to?
I can start really briefly. I think that one thing that is more important now than it's ever been, although it's always been an important thing to do, is for people to share stories, right? And I mean sort of publicly being vocal about the harms that people are seeing. And I mean that sort of in public for the news media, in community meetings, but I also mean it with like congressional representatives, with your city representatives, with your state representatives, so that they know what people are seeing and they know what the damage that this can cause and they know what people want to see in response. Those are important things. I think hearing from sort of real people about the real harms that people are seeing, that's the kind of information that really moves politicians, right, in Washington, D.C. I'm not saying that every politician is going to be moved, especially certain ones. Some of them may be happy to hear about sort of damage that's being done. I don't know. But the important thing is like the stories about what damage is being done or could be done or would be done by these executive orders, by other things that could come out. I think that's really important information for people to hear, for your member of Congress, for your local representatives, for everybody.
Yeah, the other, I would like to add, flood those people with phone calls. Really, you need to flood them with phone calls. I think they owe it to us. We elect them to be in that office for them to protect us and to work with us. So I think 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 phone calls a day would make a difference. And I'm telling you. And I would say, don't write an email, call. Because that has a major effect when you call.
They keep a tally every day of how many calls
Of course.
they get.
So I was on a call with Senator Schumer yesterday. He said the Hill got 2 million
Yes.
calls yesterday, which I think is one of the biggest days they've ever gotten. And so
Yes.
that's important. Like,
Yeah.
that means we're immobilized. Yeah.
I agree. I think you call. Also, document. This is document what's happening. Everyone who hears about something, call organizations. Make sure we are document every single incident, because statistics are power, right? It's like that's how you can achieve a result, by showing what's happening. So you can speak, in general, but if you have something, that people can see what's going on, I think that speaks volume. So I think
I was just going to add, I think on one of those cases that we've seen that has been very convincing, and we got a number of members of Congress to come to JFK with us last weekend and work with us. We saw a woman who came in from Iraq, and she was detained. She was in detention at JFK. Her son is an active duty U.S. Army officer who was due to serve in North Carolina the next day. And he came up to try and resolve it, and we had to work with members of Congress, and she was released. But that is the kind of story that we need to get out there, right? Like that's what people who are both the voters and representatives from all over the country need to hear that. And they need to hear the harm that is being done to everybody.
And I don't think for the purpose of only calling, let them see if they can come up with the legislation. Why not? They're Congress. They need to do something about this, and they need to, to have a bill. They submit a bill, and there are some Congress people who are starting to doing this. Why don't we do that? And I think it's very important that all of us to do this. So we have another branch that stands up and says, this is wrong. We have one branch is doing it. Let's get the other branch doing it too. So you have two branches. They say, what, this branch is out of its mind. Let's do something about this.
So, I'm going to add on to that, actually. I mentioned beforehand I'm on the local community board, which I don't know if many of you know what that is. It is the local of most local levels of government. It's a voluntary appointment where you serve as a liaison between the community and your elected officials and the city agencies. I was appointed originally by Comptroller, he was then Borough President of Manhattan, Stringer, post the World Trade Center mosque sort of issue and controversy. And at that time, he actually did specific outreach because he saw that there weren't a lot of Muslims on community boards. Community boards do the zoning. They give permission, they give zoning around development that occurs. We work on issues from businesses and liquor licenses to unsafe intersections. There are different committees, and you have a way to sort of really have your voice heard. They're public meetings. Everybody can show up. Usually at my community board committee meeting, it's only the committee that shows up, and I will tell you that when a member of the public comes, it is so exciting, and you really want to encourage them to participate. But also, members of the public are there to voice their concerns, and when they do show up, it's because they're worried about something. And as a liaison to, our elected officials, when they do come to say that this is a concern, we do, voice those concerns, and frequently we'll do resolutions. And, all politics is local. It is your local community, your council member that gets to know the people on the ground and is worried about the ground, who will then take that information up the chain too for you and advocate, like both Councilmember Levine and Borough President do. And I think, for me as, a child of immigrants who barely, frankly, I didn't vote unless it was a presidential election. I did not even know who my council members was. It was it has been one of the most enriching experiences. I know all of my elected officials. I feel incredibly comfortable going to them because I've learned that, they are there. There's a reason why, public servants choose this path, and they really are committed to the community. And I think that's why it's so hard when we have someone like Trump who doesn't understand how important being a public servant and giving your life and so much of the sacrifice that our elected officials do, because they really want to make the city a better place and that community a better place. And I think that they're there to hear from you. And what I've done sort of organizing-wise, I have an East Side Manhattan list and a West Side list, and I basically on Monday, emailed everybody with a list with numbers. I made it incredibly easy for everybody. It's like, Congressman Nadler was at JFK. You live on the West Side. He's your congressman. Please call and thank him for all this, and please ask him to look into this, resolution, and just sort of go down the list and organize. But I do know we are very lucky. We live in a very democratic city, and all of our elected officials are Democrats. But I do think if you have family in other states, organize them. Tell them this is a concern. Did you know? And I will say one other sort of little anecdote is I saw, interestingly, because I started doing Twitter a lot more after this whole election, but I saw. I saw an elected official in Ohio thanked the council member, I think it was Jimmy Van Bruin, for his help in helping one of the Columbus residents who was detained at JFK. And so I saw these sort of relationships between elected officials in different cities and states, and I know that happened much more. Yeah. More than I can remember, but I thought that was really wonderful. So we know that these people are connected, so we need to help the people that we know in our communities to hear, because sometimes people live in states where they don't know any Muslims, and if you're a non-hijab wearing Muslim woman, they don't realize you're Muslim either when they meet with you. So I think it's our duty is also to voice that to the rest of the country, like our relationships, and I think I would encourage all of us to sort of participate in that level too.
And there's one more week to apply for.
Yes, I was so happy to see that. I saw that. And you can do it as a teen, 16 and 17-year-olds. I have a wonderful teen member, so if you know any wonderful students, it'd be great to get them on board. Great way to start civic engagement. So, did you have to add anything?
Yeah, just a couple of things in addition to what everybody has already said. If you are a United States citizen, exercise your rights, right? So we advise people what to do if the FBI shows up at their door, how to handle questioning at the airport. It makes it easier for people who don't have that status, who don't have economic or racial or whatever kind of privilege to exercise those rights if you are exercising them as well. And then lastly, nobody's really mentioned this, but I think that even if you can, donate to the organizations that are helping people in this situation. So, for example, people who collect money for students under DACA students who who might lose financial aid and who are in school and want to continue their schooling. And refugee assistance organizations especially, who help refugees who have come here, who don't know anything about American culture or how things work here, help them acclimate at least to the point where they can at least, go out and buy groceries on their own, things like that. I think that's also really important if you can afford to do it.
Great. So you know what? We have plenty of time for questions, and I know everyone's really itching. So this lady right here, yes.
I would like to thank everybody for this wonderful panel. My name is Suat Kirama. I'm calling on behalf of the Arabic and Muslim community in Astoria. I just want to share that for the first time we had a rally yesterday in Astoria. And I would like to also share that Astoria is the most diverse neighborhood in the U.S. I'm very proud of being a true Astorian. I lived there for 30 years. I love the neighborhood, love the diversity, the dynamic. And also my profession, I'm a parent advocate. And I work with Muslim families who got involved with child welfare system. Also, I work with families who experience any challenges at school, in public school. And I've heard a gentleman from the city, forgive me, I didn't get your name.
Sam.
Sam, nice to meet you, Sam. Saying wonderful things that you want to make sure that people have access to benefits. To reflect this wonderful spirit, we have a progressive, wonderful mayor that I would like to applaud. He has spoken loudly, clearly that he, not New York City, but unfortunately, we don't see this wonderful spirit reflected in local public schools. I handled a case yesterday where, during lunch, 12th grade had a little interaction. John called Muhammad ISIS. Go back to your country. Of course, at this age, they handle things differently. They handle with little anger management, with little violence. So one thing led to another. He was handcuffed. I was called. We went to the police precinct. It was totally mishandled. No compassion, no understanding. So we would like the city to really, start a dialogue with community like us. People reach out to us. I manage so many Facebook groups with Muslim female mothers are feeling depressed. They have fear to go out and be a productive women working, single moms with hijab who are easy targets for hate crime and verbally or physically. So we would like to make sure this wonderful message has some, mechanism to be, communicated and conveyed to, principals, to school staff, counselors, social workers, everybody. We can spread this good message, but what is it good if it's not, really demonstrated and practiced? Also, now, like you said, there is a lot of misinformation and fear and you name it, and people are spreading rumors. And unfortunately, there are some Arab lawyers who are giving, some advices, but not the right advice. For example, the major message out there is, please stay out of trouble, you immigrant. Stay out of trouble. What that's supposed to mean? Tell me. Does any immigrant want to wake up and say, oh, I'm going to be good troublemaker today. I'm going to just, no. These are the most law-abiding citizens. Want to work hard, very peaceful, loving people. And to be conveyed that message, to some other people, what it means do not speak out. Do not fight back. Do not report all those hate crimes. Don't document this era of fear-mongering and hate and fear. So they are told to stay out of trouble, like what? Please give me some hints. I will not go out and drive my cat. I will not show up with my hijab. If I'm bullied and told to go back and assaulted, shall I not call 911? One person told a 15-year-old, hey, if you're bullied and let's say you are, walk away. If you are in one piece, you're not like murder, be happy. No, this is not the message we want to convey to our people. When in this time, when refugees are under attack or Muslims or immigrants, we need to organize. We need to fight back. We need to speak up. We need to empower people to voice their concerns in a very meaningful way, very healthy, and it starts from the top to bottom. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
That gentleman in the back in the maroon? You?
Oh.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify something. I'm sorry, Naz.
Yes.
You had said, when you were talking about the stories about cab drivers being pulled over and asked to prove legal residency, you said they should produce a New York City ID card. But do you need to prove legal residency to get the New York City ID card? I thought the idea behind it was that you don't. So
No.
would they accept that for that purpose?
They should. I mean, you can refuse to hand over any other form of ID.
You're saying to do that as a first
Yeah.
thing,
So,
because that's the lowest
yeah,
level.
our general advice,
Keep your
yeah.
stuff in your pocket.
Right. Our general advice is if they ask you for ID, hand over ID that has the least amount of information on it as possible.
I see, just as an ID.
Yeah,
not
just as an ID.
proof of residency.
Yes.
Okay.
Follow up on that, please. Considering the connected nature of the White House, I'm wondering if ICE and the FBI, is the Yemeni community being targeted now, or is that potential?
Do you mean targeted in which way? Because the Yemeni community has been targeted in so many ways over the years. So,
You had said that ICE can walk into their business and demand identity cards.
well, we haven't heard of ICE walking into bodegas or grocery stores as of right now.
I was mentioned that there are WhatsApp messages and emails going out within the community that are scaring people that ICE is doing raids and there's an uptick, and that and which we have not heard.
Yeah.
But everyone is so nervous that this is getting sent around. That's what I mentioned.
I think something happened in Jersey City, not here. But.
Not in
Well, it's not in that specific way more than any other community in New York.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think. Yeah.
My question is for Mr. Mohammed. In the earlier part of your presentation, you mentioned a person admitted or given entry. Can you explain the difference between the two terms?
There is the entry, there is the executive order has the word entry rather than admission, and that's what led to canceling some of the visa, even for the people who are here. They try to cancel there. So I think when you're admitted, you're admitted with to the country lawfully, to enter the country. And that's really what's the admission. But the executive order did not use the word admission, used the word entry.
So do you mind?
Go ahead. Yes,
So admission is all of these terms are, well, admission is specifically is like a term of art. So admission means that you are legally admitted into the country. So there are people who enter the country without going through customs, and they're considered called entry without inspection. So they have not been legally, according to the U.S. government, admitted into the country. So entry can include anybody who doesn't try to go through the border, but includes people who are bypassing the border. And entry is also a term of art in immigration law to the extent that you are considered to be applying for entry even if you are in the United States and you are adjusting for your status. So you're applying for your green card, and that is considered, if you get your green card, that is considered an entry. So again, this is why it's important to consult an experienced immigration attorney, because it is so, these things are very complicated.
So that's why people who are here trying to apply for a green card, they can stop that process and cancel that. Because even though they are here, even though they're admitted, but they can do that for them.
Gentleman in the purple sweater.
So, Asya, you mentioned sort of misinformation and the idea that people are relying on misinformation, and that's causing a lot of fear. I was curious if Naz could sort of tell us about, and anyone else, but I know that Naz may have some answers to this, where people can look to for accurate information on these issues as they're happening. And I also thought it might be interesting for people to talk about how their various organizations responded to the ban in time and sort of the work that they've been doing. I think the audience might be interested to hear about that too.
So with respect to finding the most up-to-date information, I would look to actually Twitter and Facebook for ACLU National, International Refugee Assistance Project, CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, also our organization. The problem with everything being changing is that it's hard to update people in real time with email blasts and things like that. So if you have concerns, if you see something on the news, go check out the Twitter feeds and Facebooks or websites for these organizations. The people who have been litigating these cases, I know it can be complicated to figure out who is doing them. A lot of the time now news reporting, especially the New York Times or other organizations, they will actually link to the court documents themselves, and you can see who is representing the plaintiffs. And with respect to with respect to, I would also, consider, I wouldn't just rely on like what the news organizations are tweeting or are saying, because they'll sometimes, a lot of the time, they'll be relying on leaks. So they'll say like an unnamed State Department official or whatever, and in our business, it's like, it's not very, we don't like to advise people solely on the basis that, oh, this one person from the State Department told CNN that they're going to do this. Because we don't want to advise people, just, if somebody isn't willing to put their name on it, if there's an official stamp, like we don't want to provide unsafe advice.
The other thing I'll add on that front is that CBP, the federal agency that deals with people when they're coming into the country at the border, at the airport, they have put together a website with some basic information, right? And so I think we need to know, anybody needs to know what their practice is. And so if you want to know what their interpretation is of what's going on, that's a good place to go. And they are keeping it updated every day.
Yeah, that's
because
really
they have a
good.
responsibility to inform the public about what they're doing.
And I will add, like, in New York, there is like several Muslim leaders listservs that we do share information, and I've been trying to add on, because I bring the public health perspective, the things that the city government, the services that are still available where it doesn't matter what your status is. So, and I think that, I was surprised there were people who didn't think that other than emergency health care, you could not access health care. And that's something that, we're just trying to get that message out, and I feel like it needs to go out multiple times because the community may not see it the first time.
I'll use that as another plug that we have these in many languages. I have English and Arabic here today, but we have these on our website, and I brought a bunch too.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's great. I think we had a gentleman in the back there. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about DACA, and you were saying something earlier about the possibility of warrants, warrants in order to enforce. What happens with the Dream Act recipients if that is reversed and they're sort of have to come in for it? Like, what are the possible scenarios that could play out about that?
Do you want to answer?
I mean, I can give a really quick answer. I think Naz is probably better prepared on it than I am. In the DACA program, right, this was a 2012 thing that President Obama created, basically, that said we will defer deportation for certain people if you meet these criteria. They were very clear that that could be eliminated, right? It says it on the documents that people get back from the federal government when they applied. And I hope that anybody who applied got good advice from an attorney that they needed to understand that there may be risks involved. We all have made it very clear that we feel strongly that the program has been incredibly valuable, has been really important. In my office, we actually have a number of DACA recipients employees, and across the city government as well. People who have become nurses, people who have become teachers, people who are working. So we've all made it very clear, I think, including to our congressional officials and the White House, that we think it's a very valuable program. But it's not written into law. And so it is subject to essentially being removed at a moment's notice, which is a really scary thing. And the truth is that those people, their names, their addresses are all with the federal government. And I don't say that to alarm people, but that's the truth. And so I think that's part of the messaging that we need to make clear here, is that there is incredible damage done to removing a program like that, right? These are people who are working here, in many cases actually people who are doing great public service. And so we need to make clear that, like, the harm that would happen if that were removed, which has not been so far.
I wanted to just reiterate the question, because the piece of it is like my concern. I've had a number of interactions with DACA communities and worked in youth centers where there's a lot of DACA recipients, and my concern is that DACA recipients could be used as a wedge for ICE to engage in enforcement actions within a sanctuary city like New York. And I just wanted to state that, and I just wonder if anybody else has anything to say about that.
Well, I mean, some states and cities have provided more, like, for example, New York, I think within the past 2 years, allowed DACA recipients to receive, like, certain types of licenses that they may not, DACA recipients, people won't necessarily have in other states. I think one thing that could happen, even if they don't decide to go whole hog and put them in deportation, is that they will stop issuing work authorization, which is really, like, awful for people in this situation who they may be the only people in their family working, or they're trying to support themselves. We have yet to see, like, what exactly they're going to do. I really don't think that, to the extent that DACA could be used as a wedge, I understand that like this was something that a lot of his supporters probably agreed that like maybe DACA shouldn't exist. But I think publicly, he's going to want to, his administration is going to want to rely on like, we're going to get everybody out of here who's working without authorization and who have committed crimes. I mean, that has been the narrative since 96. We're going to get the criminals out and we're going to keep families. Now, I'm not agreeing with that narrative, obviously, but that's been the consistent narrative over time.
I think this lady, did you have a question? Yes.
Just one thing that you really haven't talked about is there are a number of us here who work with detainees who are in like Elizabeth Detention Center, various places around the country. I'm not sure that it's one of those dark secrets of the United States that you arrive with everything legitimate. This is prior to the executive order, but you ask for asylum, you are immediately shackled and taken to a detention center, and you are not allowed access to a lawyer. And then there's the other group who are in those detention centers who may have well lived in this country for many, many years. And because of the federal law that has now mandated that what was a misdemeanor may allow them to then become detention rights, they are then put in detention centers and then started in legal execution. So I just wanted to speak on behalf of that group and wonder, there's anything
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a huge concern. It's kind of amazing that is something that we haven't even.
Can you restate?
Oh, sure, yeah. So, I think the question was, and correct me if I'm getting it wrong, or the comment was that one of the things that we have not even managed to touch on because there's so much going on, is that there's this real fear of ICE expanding, I think, the existing practice that they have, which is that they detain a lot of people who are, in many people's views, I think, not sort of worthy of being detained, right? These are not people who are sort of like violent criminals who need to be locked up so that they can't do anything. These are people who are sometimes, we've seen unaccompanied minors detained. We've seen people who are asylum seekers detained, people who have committed very, very minor offenses.
The bar of what being criminal means.
Right.
Like what the act, like.
So a real concern, of course, and I think it's one that we share. I was mentioning before that there is a program in New York City that ensures that anybody who's currently in detention receives a lawyer. And I think that's really sort of like one of the most powerful things that we can do, because in these are such sort of fact-specific cases that it's hard to say sort of like how to solve it in each particular case, but I think people need to have a lawyer there to sort of represent them, to help them exercise their rights. And that's really, we have seen, I think, from some early data from that program across the country, is that if you don't have a lawyer and you're detained, only about 10% of people manage to remain in the U.S. and 90% get removed. And then for people who actually have a lawyer, it's like almost exactly flipped. That somewhere between 80 and 90% of people actually succeed in remaining in the U.S. So you can sort of see the power of having a lawyer with you in these kind of situations.
Sounds like housing courts.
It's like an eviction proceeding almost. Yeah.
I just like to.
You don't.
I just like to. I don't know about what's going to happen now, but we had the experience after 2001, after 9/11. We dealt a lot with detainees, and it was a horrible experience. As a matter of fact, people had lawyers, and what they did, when they go before, then they end up going before a federal court, right? And they will, like something minor, writing a check, debt bonds, and they will take them, and then they will, and then what they will do, they will deliver them to ICE, and then ICE will take them, and the lawyer keep checking on the person who is detained, and they keep moving them from one state to another, and then they deport them. So even if you have a lawyer, it happened this before, and I'm sure it's going to happen again. 2001, that's what we were dealing with after 2001. So.
We have time for one more question. I'll do the gentleman there.
This is probably a question for Mel, maybe Sam, or it's maybe a plea. It's the fear among current visa holders and green card holders from these 7 countries, but also Muslims who countries who weren't named, like Jordan and Turkey. The fear is really high out there. Is there a website that gives, and you spoke very clearly, Naz, a really clear advice if you are detained or encountered by ICE, what to do. And I can remember some of these things, but I'm not going to remember all of them. And mostly I'd like to give my brothers and sisters who are expressing these fears good, clear information. Is there?
Yes. So one, the Immigrant Defense Project has really great toolkits in multiple languages for how to deal with ICE raids and questioning by ICE. We also, CLEAR, have Know Your Rights information for interacting with law enforcement if they come to you on the street or at your home, how to handle questioning while you're traveling, and a couple of other situations. And we've also been updating our information, our advice to people with respect to this specific executive order. But I would, with respect to anything having to do with ICE, I would really refer to the Immigrant Defense Project. They've put together really comprehensive, informative, easy to understand materials.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you. We ended.
So I was going to say this.
You don't know.